Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello everybody, welcome to a very special bonus episode with a repeat guest, Susanne Taylor. We'll be talking about leading change. Hey Susanne, welcome to the show.
Hey Vasco, it's so cool to be back.
Absolutely. So Susanne is a transition coach, which translates in her own words to roles such as change management facilitator, organizational development consultant, Scrum Master, agile coach, community manager, and often all of them simultaneously. And Susanne has learned to be adaptable and resilient after having lived in Alaska, Japan, Taiwan, and now Germany. That's a quite diverse set of countries right there. And she's passionate about accompanying people on journeys of transformation. Also, she considers herself an introvert. We'll let you all judge that statement as we go through this episode. So, Susanne, welcome. As we start this episode on the topic of leading change, that's how I like to call it, at least. I mean, change is a very big topic. I like to look at our role as leading change in some way, in sometimes very high-level leadership, sometimes very down-to-earth, day-to-day leadership. One question in my mind is, obviously, you've been facing change on your personal life and on your professional life for a long time. Is there an origin story for you to develop this interest, your own approach to change and change leadership?
Well, I mean, the key word there is development, right? That's something that happens over time. And as you mentioned in my introduction, I have a lifetime of change. So I grew up between two cultures. My dad was American and my mom's Austrian. And one of my aunts married an Italian. So the family, when we came together, we would speak 3 different languages. And today we still do. It's this chaotic mix. And I was also attracted to living and being in Asia and studying Asian languages, which my Italian uncle totally didn't understand. It did not resonate for him. And so, right, living between cultures, living in places where I wasn't understood, going between industries. I was looking at all the industries that I've worked in. I think I counted 5 or 6. And I would say, like most people in the last few years, there has been a lot of change that I didn't choose. And that's the hardest kind of change to manage and to cope with. And at the same time, I have a practice of choosing change. So it's as if things aren't evolving, I start to feel like something's not right. And so it's not just change for change's sake, but that's why I use the word evolve. Because for me, this is our natural state as humans and as being part of the planet. We're meant to evolve. We are meant to change. So over the years, I've studied all kinds of different things, mostly the psychological, internal aspects of that. And it's never ending what we can learn. And that's, what development is. It's just ongoing.
So I hear from your story that there's this acceptance that change has become an intrinsic and impossible to ignore and avoid part of how you see going through life. And of course, also we're talking about professionally, so evolving our organizations.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
And when you think about that, like what are the key aspects that you find people often miss about that need to constantly evolve our organizations?
Well, you said it already that in fact, evolving and change is a natural part of life. It's like the weather. I love the weather metaphor because weather is happening. We don't control the weather. The only thing we control is what kind of clothes we wear and whether we choose to go out in it. And yes, I say growing up in Alaska with extreme weather was great training for that. And I lived for a while in Oregon where there was lots and lots of rain in the town that's Nike World headquarters. People running everywhere. And the expression I heard the most was, yeah, it's just rain. We're not made of sugar.
Yeah, in Finland we have this phrase that there's no bad weather, only bad clothes. And when it
Exactly.
comes to change, if we take that phrase to change the context of organizational change and evolution as you called it, then we can also say there's no bad change. It's just we're not ready for it, or we don't know how to react to it, or we're not willing to adapt to it, or whatever that may be, right?
Yeah, so there's something called change fatigue, right? We have different capacities and I would say energy levels around change. And most of us experienced this in the last couple of years, the massive amounts of change. And the repercussion of that was, of course, people leaving their jobs that they felt were meaningless or um, just requiring too much energy because the energy we needed was to cope with the change, frankly. Um, so yeah, we'll just leave it at that.
So let's dive into that adaptation to change, or adoption rather of change as a natural state. When we were prepping this episode, you talk about the need to shift our mindset towards embracing change as a constant state. Of course, now we're talking to change agents out there, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches, change agents in general in our industry. Can you elaborate on this shift in mindset and how it can positively impact our approach to leading change, to being part of that change?
Yes. So first, let me just talk briefly. The old paradigm, I would say the old script, the old way we have of thinking and the way we've been conditioned to think about change, or to think about how we operate in the world. I mean, go even more basic, how we run our businesses, how we motivate people. Uh, it's based on control and fear and competition and you got to hurry up because there might not be enough, you're going to miss out on this. We see it in advertising, for example. I mean, easiest example is clickbait. Hurry up, there's only one left. Or this word FOMO, fear of missing out. And the beautiful thing is that we realize this is not going to help us thrive in this new world of constant change. So I love the word flux. Flux is the acceptance of constant change, being able to be fluid and to be adaptive. And I wouldn't necessarily use the word adopt because that would mean that you take it on. In fact, if you don't ever adopt anything and you just remain adaptive, you can pivot anytime. So this new script is more about collaborating and creating meaningful connection. So building relationships and recognizing that we are all connected. We're deeply connected. So our customers are not resources. Our customers aren't they aren't transactions. They are a potential for long-term relationship building. And we're in this together. We're co-creating. So, as I would say, change agents, change leaders, the most important thing that we need to remember is that ultimately what we are doing to support people in change is facilitating connection.
So if I take this, let's take this perspective. And I often say that as Scrum Masters, as Agile coaches, as change agents, our medium is people. Like, we don't work with processes or structures or frameworks. We work with people, right? And we help people achieve their goals. Hopefully, we help people collaborate better with each other. Collaboration is a critical domain for us, a critical domain of skill and development for change agents and Scrum Masters out there. What do you think are other skills and capabilities that we must develop to be able to get to that level of not only understanding that it is through people that we work, that we are building relationships and connecting people, and of course being connected to them as well, but the skills that you think we need to develop in order to feel what I would call naturally comfortable with change, i.e. accepting its existence?
Okay, so there are, I would say, 4 or 5. I know we only have half an hour. So actually there are probably 8, but I'm only going to touch on the ones that maybe resonate with me the most right now. And recently I was at the Agile Lean Europe conference and spoke there. And what resonated for so many people there was the ability to run slower. So to find a pace that was sustainable for work and not to fear that a pause meant stopping, that in fact a pause could mean slowing down. So instead of doing more faster, as we know, it's doing the right things better with more attention, more greater focus, and more, I'm going to go back to that word, intention, a very clear choice and a very clear purpose behind that choice, and to consistently make those choices. So that's one, is really slowing down and being aware of making intentional choices about what you are using your energy for. Second one would be, and it seems like a no-brainer, but I think because it sounds so simple, it gets lost. And it's this: start with trust, building trust. It means that you have to be vulnerable. It means you have to start with the best intentions, that everyone comes to the table with the same desire to make a great product, to do a better thing for the world, to have a good team, and to enjoy their work. So this trust building starts with developing an ability or a capacity to start with the people in the room, like check-ins. Those are often overlooked. Well, we don't really have time for a check-in. Everybody's okay, fine, let's just get started. No, start with, how is everybody doing today? What's your level of energy? Are you distracted? Do you have lots of energy? How could we just pay attention to that? This is important, to seeing each other as people, as humans, not as numbers or transactions. The next one would be really setting clear boundaries. And I say this because we as change agents are in service of other people. And our role isn't necessarily directly connected to the bottom line. You can't see like a salesperson does or a software developer. Where is our contribution in numbers being seen? And it's really difficult for people in this service role to quantify their value. And so I would say, let's flip it and say, you start from the inside. You find your own enoughness. You identify for yourself what is your purpose, what is your value, what matters to you. And that's where you focus your energy. And that's where you stand. That becomes your value proposition. an example could be, as you said earlier, my focus is on enabling people to do the best work possible in the best environment and to feel good about it and to find meaning in that environment. Without, of course, overtaxing ourselves. That's why we have to start with ourselves. It's this boundary setting actually starts with put your own oxygen mask on first. We've heard it a lot. And in fact, that means recognizing when enough is enough, and that, in fact, you are enough already. There's nothing you need to prove. Just by showing up and holding space for people to do better work, that's pretty amazing. That's huge added value. And I would say, last but not least, the one that I feel is very important is this capacity to sense what is happening. So we've heard it referred to as reading the room. I would say it's more like seeing what's invisible. It's reading between the lines. It's sensing, how are people feeling around me, even though they said they're fine, but I can sense by looking at their body language that they're not. Or because I have a relationship with this person, I know that they've just had a death in the family or they have a sick child. It's being present with I would say, all the high context stuff, the stuff that's not being articulated or said. And the only way to do that is to be present, to quiet your mind and be fully in the space with that person or those group of people that you're working with.
So, we could, as you said, we only have half an hour. We could spend half an hour on each of those easily. I want to highlight some, though. Of course, I'll start with the one that most resonated with me, which is this ability to set clear boundaries, identifying what we are doing, like who we are serving and why we do it, not necessarily, what's the bottom line, but rather what drives us, and understanding that in order for us to be able to lead others in change, we first must be able to lead ourselves through that change. And one of the things that you said that is really important is when we decide to start with self, understanding how do I feel about this change? Like, is this meaningful for me? Am I being coherent with what I think is important in the context of, whatever, agile adoption or adopting a new development practice, whatever the micro context or macro context might be at that time. If we're able to start with that, we are then able to do what you mentioned as the last one, which is the capacity to sense what is happening. Because one of the things that I find extremely counterintuitive, but very obvious once you experience it, is that if you're not self-aware, you cannot be aware of others. And I see that as in our position of leadership, that is a fundamental skill set that we need to be able to develop. In fact, I've built a whole talk about this for Scrum Masters, is that how can we coach others if no one is coaching us? If we don't know what the experience is of being coached, how can we ever be able to be a good coach to others, right? It starts with self.
Yep. Yes. And I think also recognizing what we have that's more than enough, right? We all have some kind of privilege. And interestingly enough, sometimes the more privilege we have, it becomes a blocker for changing out of this old mindset. Because of course we want to protect this thing that we know that we have. It's a place we feel more powerful. And at the same time, it blocks us, this privilege, it blocks us from certain new perspectives, which of course often lead to new solutions and innovations in the space.
Can you give an example of what you mean by that? Like, well, you use the word privilege, but let's take it down to the change leader, change agent. What does that mean?
So often I would say in a change situation, leaders have the privilege of knowing beforehand what's going to happen. We have the privilege of information. We don't know how it's necessarily going to happen, but we know that change is coming, that either based on business numbers or something happening with a competitor. We also then will sit in a room with other decision makers and be told, hey, this is what's going to happen, and you need to help it take place. So we have I would say, a higher view, like in flight levels, where at the top level, we can't see the details, but we can see far into the future, which will give us the privilege of maybe some greater confidence or less fear, or
More urgency.
Yes, and maybe trust, but maybe not. And I would say it's often we have the illusion of stability and power when we are part of that decision-making process. But of course, there's no guarantee anywhere. But this illusion helps us take that step, how to bridge the gap between what I know and what I don't know, the known and the unknown.
And when we then, so what I was thinking is, okay, so if I have that privilege, then I can bring that information, in this case, to the service of those that I am helping to go through the change, or I can keep it and therefore keep the privilege. Is that what you mean?
Yes. So one of the old scripts is knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you have, the more you get to make decisions for yourself. Okay. But in the new script, in this new world, the reality is we're recognizing that separation is false. In fact, we are all connected. My decisions impact all the people around me. If I decide I'm going on vacation and I don't tell anyone in my team, of course that has a direct impact on how much work there's going to be for people. How are we going to solve problems? It also will impact my vacation, because if they need to call me in an emergency, it's interrupting my vacation. So the fact that the illusion of separation is this idea that as an individual, if I have all the knowledge, I have all the power. I would say it's the opposite of that. We have greater power when we share our knowledge, when we share decision making.
And I really like this aspect that you mentioned. We have the illusion of separation, but in the end, we are all connected. And I guess this links very well with the next question, because in the podcast, I talk a lot about change leadership. I don't think you can manage change. I mean, you can flow with the change, you can ride the change, and sometimes the change rides you. That also happens. But you talk about leadership in the context of change, which is not leadership in the context of, I don't know, going to market or building a better sales team or whatever. It's a very specific type of leadership that we are talking about. It's about here. So what is that type of leadership? How do you define it? How do you describe it, this leadership in the context of change?
So we've touched on it already, but leadership in the context of change is, how do you approach the unknown, or the ability to not know? Because that's our new reality. There are things we cannot predict, things that are not logical, things that are so far advanced in the future that as leaders, we have to focus on, okay, what's here right now? What's the next best decision? And at the same time, we have to consider the data from the past, because we have so much data now, we can learn from that. And we have to bring the people that are with us, around us, with us. So, right, that you'll hear often, like, you can't lead anybody if nobody will follow you. So a key aspect of leading in change is to connect with the people where they are. You may have the information, you may have the vision that is future oriented, and you're excited and you're energized about what's happening. But if you cannot connect with where people are now, it will be very difficult to bring them with you. Again, I'm going to go back to that idea of connection. Probably one of the key skills that we need to develop in this role is to facilitate conversations, to bring every voice in, to hear everyone, and to get all their ideas, to get all their concerns, because then they're engaged. The truth is, no change will ever happen unless they're the people who are part of the change actually get to decide what it looks like.
Yeah, and people are the actors in the change when it comes to organizations and developing organizations or evolving organizations. And this is often, I think, a metaphor problem, because a lot of the times change is about project managing the change, right? Like we do certain role changes, we institute certain processes, and then everything is done. And of course, as we know, as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches, all the names have changed, but people are still doing the same things they were doing before the names changed.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And this is perhaps one thing that I think Scrum Masters and Agile coaches especially can bring in to the leadership in change context, which is that we already accept by definition that we work through people. We don't work through processes. We don't work through policies. We don't work through hierarchies. We work through people, right? It's what people choose to do that represents our work.
Exactly. Yes.
So where would we start with this? Because this is not the leadership we learn about in university. In fact, if you do an MBA, it will all be about numbers, policies, structures, and top-down management, so which is the opposite of what we were just talking about. So if we want to get started, where would we go?
So I would say I was part of the first wave of people liberated about a year ago. And what I did with my time, is what we often do, is begin to explore and follow my passions. Change and development of people is one of them. And I discovered a book called Flux, written by April Rhine. I think the subtitle is 8 Superpowers for Thriving in Constant Change. And what this book does beautifully is it codifies these different capacities and all the different levels. So it talks about what you can do as an individual to develop these capacities. It talks about what you could do in a group of people, your team or your organization. And it addresses leadership. So what can you do when you're out front or you're preceding the wave of the next change? And she's featured on a podcast, I think, another podcast, Slow Mo. Some people might know him. And she's also had a TED Talk. And I would say for example, there's the Inner Development Goals Summit that's happening right now in Stockholm, for example. And the Inner Development Goals are I would say, the other side of the coin for what the UN has created, those sustainability development goals, right? And the premise of the Inner Development Goals is that we cannot change our external world unless we change our internal world, unless we become aware of what we need to change and develop within ourselves and between each other. So I would say those are really rich places to begin exploring. What could I do? How could I do it differently? Because they're full of suggestions and easy things to try.
Absolutely. And we all will need to get started somewhere so that we may evolve wherever we may evolve to. So Susanne, it's been a pleasure. As we've said already a few times, this could be a much longer podcast with a lot more threads in the conversation. But before we go, if people want to get in touch with you and know more about the work that you're doing, where could they go?
I'm active on LinkedIn. I run a meetup group in Munich around liberating structures. And I'm also active in the inner development goals community, also on LinkedIn.
Absolutely. We'll put the link to those on the show notes so that people can go and easily find Susanne. What's one parting word of advice that you have for our friends out there before we let you go to continue your evolution?
I have a favorite quote from Malcolm X. I hope I don't mess it up, but it's something like, when you replace I with we, even illness becomes wellness. And that's my parting words, is really begin to practice noticing connection everywhere. And to hold the two opposites. Yes, we are on an individual journey. We're on unique journeys, and we're all doing them together at the same time.
Practice noticing connection. I love that. Susanne, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
It was a pleasure. I always love talking with you, Vasco.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.